So you finally started a conversation, now what? This is actually the place where most guys mess it up. They end up asking lame, boring question after lame, boring question. They end up in this safe, platonic interaction that's never gonna go anywhere. They end up, best case, in the friend zone. More often than not, they end up with, nice to meet you, see you later, bye, or I have a boyfriend. How do you go from nothing or platonic conversation to something that's actually sexually charged, flirtatious, building attraction, actually taking this conversation somewhere that's gonna lead to good results with the girl? Well, the concept I coined called premise, i.e. the premise that it is a man-to-woman interaction, the premise that if this goes somewhere, it will be in a sexual direction. So let's talk about that concept right here, right now. The next concept I want to illustrate to you is a concept I call get to the point. And this is one of the biggest things I see. A lot of times what I do with students is I actually film them and then I break down their footage, and over and over and over again I see guys not getting to the point. And I'll talk about that in the specific context of game in a second. But in order to illustrate it, I want to actually use a movie example. Some of you may have seen this movie. If not, you can go find it pretty easily. This is from the movie Fight Club. And basically there's a scene where Edward Norton's character, basically his apartment has like exploded, like an explosion happened and it all flew out into the night in flames. So he has no place to stay. And he calls up Brad Pitt's character, who he met on a plane, barely knows, because he doesn't have a place to stay. He talks about the situation with him. They have a bunch of drinks together, and it gets to the end of the night, and there's this awkward moment where Edward Norton's character is like, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna, go call a hotel now. And Brad Pitt's character goes, what? Really? What do you mean? And he's like, Edward Norton's like, I probably need to go to a hotel. He's like, just ask, man. He's like, just ask what? He's like, man, 3 pitchers of beer, you can't even ask. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you called me because you needed a place to stay. He's like, oh, no, I don't want to. He's like, seriously, man, just ask. He's like, would it be a problem is it a problem to ask? Right? And he asked, he's like, yeah, sure, no problem, let's go. Right? Like, it's not a big deal in the world. He was just waiting for him to ask. He's just waiting for him to get to the point. Right? And there was no objection. They were on the same page, but Edward Norton was being so unassertive. He was being so, trying so hard to be, not socially awkward, trying so hard to not impose in any way, that his actually lack of imposition is weird and is in and of itself almost like an imposition and is very socially awkward. All right, and I see this from guys all the time. By the way, if you want to look up that scene, just look up Fight Club, Just Ask. You can do a search and find it pretty easily. It's actually a really good scene. And I show that to students a lot because it is such a great example of this concept. But anyway, the idea of what I see guys doing with girls all the time is they will talk about the weather, and then they'll talk about the city that they're in, and then they'll talk about, oh yeah, I just flew in and here's this interesting story. And they will not get to the point. They will not tell the girl, hey, look, I may be interested in you. They won't give her a compliment. They won't say, hey, you seem cool. They won't say, you seem interesting. They won't say, hey, I'd like to get to know you. They won't introduce themselves. They just keep it on this very, very stranger level where it's like, we're just having this conversation. I'm really crossing my fingers and hoping it'll go somewhere. And you have to understand that as much as there's social pressure against you making it man to woman and social pressure against you taking a risk, there's about 100 times more social pressure on her not to take a risk. Also, in a cold approach scenario, which is what we're talking about a lot, you went up and talked to her, right? It's your job as the man to establish the premise, to tell the girl what the conversation is. And so I see so many conversations to nowhere. So many conversations that just don't even get off the ground. And what actually happens is the girl actually is responding positively and does like the guy. But at a certain point, you get to a point where the conversational topic has kind of ended. The girl hasn't been told what the conversation's about. And she's like, okay, cool. Well, nice to meet you. Bye. And the reason she says nice to meet you, bye, isn't because she didn't like the guy. It's because she hasn't been told what the conversation is. And for that reason, it's awkward to continue it. Right? And so this lack of taking that immediate 1 second of awkwardness to establish what the premise is, it creates an entire conversation of awkwardness. It creates half an hour of awkwardness, 5 minutes of awkwardness, whatever it is. And it creates the girl awkwardly saying, you know what, it was nice to meet you, creates the end of the interaction, all right? So what I'm telling you here is get to the point. Tell the girl that it is a man-to-woman interaction. Again, we'll talk about all the ways to do it, the very obvious, blatant ways, the very subtle ways. But if you have this in your communication where very often you're not getting to the point, as simple as, hey, I thought you were cool, or hey, you seem cool now, or hey, I'm kind of enjoying meeting you, or hey, you're kind of fun to talk to, right? Hey, you're not the worst company in the world. Anything like that Does it? Hey, oh, I just realized you're actually kind of cute. Does it? Okay, but you have got to get to the point. If you do not get to the point, if you don't make it a man-to-woman conversation, nobody is going to do it for you. And if you don't make it a man-to-woman conversation, it will end. Okay, it will end. If you don't feed the conversation and turn it into what it is, it will end. I'll give you one more sort of metaphor as long as we're on the topic of metaphors. Let's say you went to go buy a car. You walk onto the car lot, you're there to buy a car, right? You start looking at a car, salesman comes up and says, hey, what's up? Starts doing like pleasantries and get to know you conversation. Hey, you know, what's up? Where are you from? Da 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 da, right? And you're like, okay, fine, he's getting to know me, whatever. That's fine. But let's say 20 minutes into the conversation, he has still not mentioned the word car. He has still not asked about your automotive preferences. He still hasn't asked why you're there, what you're looking for, any of those kind of questions. How do you feel about that salesman? You probably feel like he's wasting your time, right? You came there to buy. You came there interested. And he just won't fucking get to the point and help you buy? How unprofessional is that and how annoying is that? Okay, so a lot of people complain that car salesmen are pushy, and yes, car salesmen can be pushy. But the only thing worse than maybe an overly pushy car salesman would be a completely unpushy car salesman. And so many guys in doing game are that unpushy salesman where it's like, do you want to actually get to the point and stop wasting my time? Like, we're here for a reason, are we not? Right? With you and the girl, you're here to get to know her. So get to the point, admit the purpose of the conversation, and start acting on that purpose. Because if that purpose hasn't been established, nothing can happen from there. You guys are adorable. You look like trouble. But
I am trouble.
Are you?
Let me guess, your name is Mike, you're mostly trouble. You only do meth on the weekends. You drink whiskey with a straw.
I agree with the trouble part. The rest of that's over my head. You're a little too clever for me. Who are you? What's your name?
My name's...
Nice to meet you. I feel like...
What's your name?
My name is Todd.
Oh, I was gonna be like, if your name is Mike.
If my name was Mike, then what? We'd love each other and then hate each other soon and...
Yeah, we'd write the whole script, you know?
We'd be like off again, on again, really bad for each
so
other.
weird.
Toxic and shit.
Weird. Yeah. I'd be like, Todd, I don't even know him anymore.
Yeah. Well, that'd be weird if my name was Mike, you called me Todd. That'd be fucked up.
Sometimes you make jokes.
Are you gonna do that to me? Yeah. We'll have like the most like bed-busting sex. You roll over and be like, Mike, that was amazing. I'm like, fuck you.
You'd be like, wait, no, call me by my name.
I don't know. Treat me like a stranger. Long as we cuddle like one time in 5.
That's a good ratio.
Yeah, you like that? What is your story? You're a sarcastic little thing. I kind of enjoy you, but I kind of think that you might be terrible.
You can't tell on a night like this, you know? You gotta leave it up to fate. One
of the simplest ways to establish a premise without giving your power away is actually to do something that does show interest, but to temper it a little bit or to take it away a little bit. And the reason this is such a simple way is basically you can say whatever direct, to the point, overt statement you'd like to, and then by adding a little something to it, you make it a lot more in your favor, a lot better in terms of the frame, a lot better in terms of giving your power away. So the idea of push-pull is the idea that you're going to give a positive with a negative, right? So for example, you're really cute, but you're kind of dorky. That's like a very obvious, very kind of blatant push-pull, right? Or, you know, I thought I loved you until you said that, right? So it's this idea of there's this positive, there's something's really going in your favor, but there's a little bit of a pull away, there's a little bit of a tension, that sort of a thing. And again, this creates much more tension, much more intrigue, gives the girl much more sort of like buy into the conversation, much more reason to try and prove herself, much more reason to wonder about her status relative to you. So it creates a much better dynamic. And of course, these overt push-pulls can also become more and more subtle, and that's actually a good thing as well. So you'll notice that as you watch the infield in this program, almost like, I don't know if every line that comes out of my mouth is a push-pull, but tons and tons of the things that come out of my mouth are push-pulls. You are sincerely... Okay, I'm actually going to be sincere. Not for the reason you think, but you are actually one of the coolest girls I've met in a while. But probably not for the reasons you think.
That wasn't too backhanded.
What?
That wasn't too backhanded.
You're welcome. You're not so bad yourself.
I'll think about it.
There's nothing to think about. There was no offer.
You're like, I don't give a shit.
No, I mean, I mean, I would love to, like, engage in a little libation, conversation, and flirtation with you, but that's about as far as it can go. What?
Wow.
Well, what?
You have a good batting record, don't you?
I have a good what? Vocabulary?
Batting record.
Batting record. I didn't even play baseball.
Me neither.
Don't look at me like that.
I'm not looking at you like anything.
When you look at me like that, it makes me want to do all kinds of things that would just get both of us into trouble. If you've only learned to establish a premise, like say as a beginner, you come in and the only way you know how to establish a premise is just by giving compliments. Well, the next step might be, you're giving these compliments, learn to turn the compliments into push-pulls, and now all of a sudden you're giving far less of your power away, you're creating far more sexual tension, and you're giving the girl far more reason to submit to what's the next phase, which is this evaluation phase, where she's trying to prove herself to you, okay? So very, very powerful skill, very, very powerful technique. We're gonna talk about it again and again in the course. You're gonna see it so often in my infield. Now that you have this idea of push-pull, when you watch my infield, you're gonna see, oh, that's a push-pull, that's a push-pull, that's a push-pull, that's a really subtle push-pull, that's kind of an implied push-pull, right? There's so much of that going on when you hear me talk to girls, and over 18 years of doing game, it's almost like an instinctive thing for me. Almost everything that comes out of my mouth when I am establishing premise is of a push-pull nature. So watch for that, understand it, start implementing it yourself. There will be further discussion of this. I will show you kind of some exercises and some things you can do along the lines of creating these push-pulls, so that should be pretty useful as well. But for right now, I just want you to be very aware of it, and I want you to understand how valuable it is to establish a premise without giving your power away. So that's a quick introduction to premise, the second step in the open-close model, which I talk about extensively in my program, The System. But what is the system anyway? I know you've seen the logos on the screen, you've heard me talk about it a couple times. Basically what the system is, it's 18 years of my experience of talking to girls, getting success with girls, and teaching thousands of guys to do exactly the same thing. The lessons that I've learned distilled for you into one simple course. It's over 20 hours of footage, and a lot of that footage is similar to what you've seen here. A lot of me talking to girls in real time so you can see demonstration of exactly what I mean. I'm not going to talk too much more about it, but basically it's the best way I know to get the dating life, sex life, the relationships you want. If you want to know more about the system, click the link below and check it out there.